This episode of Lawyers Tell All is brought to you by Law Firm Conversions. If your law firm's phone is ringing, that only means your marketing is successful. It's what happens when the phone is answered that will drive your success or failure. Visit www.intakeacademy.com and claim your free copy of Chris Mullen's groundbreaking book for lawyers and law firms that gets every call converting to become a profitable client, showing you the steps you need to take to ensure the right person is answering the phone and answering it correctly. Welcome to the Lawyers Tell All podcast, where Chris Mullins, the preeminent sales and communications consultant in the legal industry, shows you how it looks through lawyers' eyes. Here, innovators in the trenches provide powerful insights that help you connect with new clients, handle the sometimes harsh realities of the legal profession, and embrace the mindsets needed to succeed. Be sure to visit our website at www.lawyerstellall.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, lean in, tune in, and let's take a deep dive.
Hello, everyone. It's Chris Mullins with Lawyers Tell All, and today I'm interviewing Allison Margolin, and I'm going to let Allison introduce herself to you. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. My name is Allison. I have been an attorney for 21 years. Actually, it will be 21 years this December, and I'm an author as well. And I've been writing since I was 8.
Wow, 8 years
That's
old.
my professional story.
When you were 8 years old, what did you write?
I'm so happy you asked because it's actually very funny. So the first story I had published was called 911, and it was for the Beverly Hills Education Foundation. Like, they published something of the best stories of each grade level, and it was about getting this fictional story about like playing outside and like being robbed or burglarized and having to call 911. Which is kind of funny because in my early days, before I knew I wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, I was kind of afraid. I was definitely afraid of crime. Both my parents had been criminal defense lawyers when I was born. My mom eventually did family law. But when I was about 6, both of my parents were like threatened. My dad had someone who was coming after him who had been illegally incarcerated for a probation violation. And he had to be like on the run for a while, and actually was staying at the Sportsman's Lodge here in the Valley for a few months. And then my mom, as a family law attorney, also had some strange threat. So my first kind of, understanding of law and my parents' like profession was kind of fear. I ended up, once I wanted to be a criminal lawyer, and dealing with criminals definitely helped me not be afraid anymore. But my first story was about being victimized. But I never was. It was a fictional story.
But like so that was, you were 6 when that was happened with your parents, and then you were 8, wrote your story based like all from that, right?
A little bit, yeah. Like my dad's girlfriend had been like hit over the head with a baseball bat during that time. And so that was kind of definitely still on my mind a couple years later.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that was my first. And actually, what's really, I actually live on the same street now that I grew up in, the same house. Like the house that happened in is at the end of this block that I now live on, that I bought a house 5 years ago.
That's
just kind of funny.
So interesting. Everybody does that, or a lot of people do that. They go back to where they came from.
Oh yeah.
Right. So now, is the reason that you chose criminal defense because of what you just said?
Well, no, not really. That's the thing. It's kind of funny. Like, when I was a child, and I was very studious and very straight. And I was kind of like, thought my dad's culture, like my dad was the head of LA Normal since 1967, which is the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws.
Mm-hmm.
And that was his kind of like, was his social scene. And I was, I guess like I started out kind of being afraid, but then once I actually was in the DARE program, and I wrote about this in my book, and started becoming aware of actually from that, and my, parents talking to me at the time about the drug laws. that was like my next kind of understanding, that like most of what was happening in the criminal world was not violent. What was being getting prosecuted was crime relating to drugs. And
Mhm.
even though I was a straight person, meaning straight laced,
Yeah, right.
yeah, the idea that people were like facing, and at that time, this is like, 1985, 86, when mandatory minimums were coming into play for all drug laws, which are, for people who don't know, they're still in place, even for cannabis on a federal level. But there are laws that say if you're charged with a certain quantity of drugs and even if you're not charged with that quantity, if the government can show beyond a reasonable doubt you conspired to distribute that quantity, people face 5, 10, 15-year mandatory minimums for drugs. So once I was introduced to the DARE program and then my parents' perspective on it,
Mhm.
then I started realizing that what was really being prosecuted was mostly that. And to me, criminalizing like people's ability to think, which even if that wasn't what I was into, still like drugs are, I think objectively change how people think. And that's, what it does.
Yeah.
I thought that was very strange that a certain way of thinking was criminalized. And I knew I knew that that was part of like my calling was to deal with that subject, even though like in my early days, the whole like lifestyle of the criminal defense attorney, I enjoyed part of it. I liked going on trips with my dad to the prisons, but like I didn't really, when I was young, relate to like many of the people in his normal crew. But I knew like early on it was my calling, still to be involved with this because of that whole idea of criminalizing consciousness and like intellectual thought. So that was early on what appealed to
Okay.
me.
Well, what about your mom? Like, how did she get into family law?
Okay, so all right, so my mom, she was the most, even my dad's ideas influenced me. My mom was was probably a little bit greater of influence. So my parents, okay, my mom was born to two Holocaust survivors, and they survived and they raised me also, as well as my great grandmother in Beverly Hills here in 1950. And my mom grew up like, first of all, my grandparents were very liberal, as many people from Eastern Europe, like, they're like, Poland was before Nazis came, it was like socialist, extremely like liberal in many ways. Like abortion was not a crime, it was what people did for birth control, for example. Um, and so those were the grandparents that raised my mom, and raised me also in large part here. So she grew up with that, and she grew up with their favorite show being Perry Mason, and parents who are very liberal, like from socialist Poland, who were very straight. However, and so like my grandmother didn't do any drugs, but she still said that like she knew from her doctor of people doing like what we now call drug maintenance back in like post-Nazi, West Germany in like 1948, that her doctor would tell her about maintaining somebody um, on drugs. Although she told me this strange story about it, but they both were like, even though they were straight living, they were very progressive thinkers. So my mom grew up like loving Perry Mason and wanted to be a criminal defense attorney, and she went to USC and then went to Southwestern Law School, and she interned at the city attorney's office, and she met my dad there when she
Mhm.
was like 24, and then she passed the bar when she was 25, and my dad had already been a criminal defense lawyer for like 9 years. But her previous boyfriend of my dad was also a criminal defense lawyer. She like knew she wanted to do that from a young age. And my parents were partners, but they had got divorced after like only several years together. And my dad already was pretty like famous as a defense attorney. So my
Mhm.
mom wasn't able to get business that was criminal defense too much. Although now, fast forward at like 50 years later, let's see, 75, no, let's say 40, let's say, I don't know, like 48 years later, she's been a lawyer. She does a lot of like domestic violence, family law defense with criminal defense attorneys. We have cases together, but she didn't get criminal cases, so she ended up getting a lot of family law cases, and that became her niche. So she's been doing that since 1975. But she still like helps me, like, in addition to being very, very supportive of all my dreams and making sure I became a lawyer in addition to a writer, by reminding me that being a lawyer is really like, in a certain way, like physically the one of the only professions you can like free people, literally get someone to take handcuffs off. And she knew I would regret not being able to do that, because that's something I knew I could do. Um, she like helps me still with like, she's an amazing trial lawyer, but she also is like great at subpoenaing and doing motions, and like if I, in the middle of my murder trial, I needed to find a police officer in another state, and she like got him subpoenaed for me in Tennessee. So she's pretty awesome. And, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents as well growing up. And I was the only
Oh,
grandchild, so they were promoted whatever I did.
yeah. So you were spoiled too.
Well,
Yeah.
and that they supported, that they let me think I wasn't aware really of like, my mom told me that there was of course like gender bias and stuff, but I never experienced it consciously, because of I think how I was raised until I was like aware. I like never consciously had that, you know. In my family, like what men were like, I mean, the women were the stars of the family and the ones with influence.
Right. Yeah.
So
Wonderful. Awesome.
yeah, yeah.
So tell me, so your book, let me look at my notes here, is called Just Dope. Yes?
Yeah, yes.
Where did that come from? Like what got you
Okay,
to,
so well, I always like to like work with double entendres. So like first of all, when I started my practice, after I was briefly I worked for my dad once and we were partners once, but in between the two, I did my own practice. And in the beginning, I tried to like distinguish myself from my dad. So we came up with this little funny ad campaign, and I had these ads of myself in these like kind of like funny provocative outfits. I was like 24, that said, want to smoke pot on probation, Harvard law, affordable, LA's dopest attorney. So that was like my moniker that one of my like 18-year-old assistants thought of.
okay.
And then from that, I ended up getting like LA Times articles, quite a bit of press, but like I don't really use, I don't really like use them about myself. But when I thought of the book, I was like these double entendres. So just dope is like justice and drugs. Just dope means it's only drugs, like which is part of kind of theme, like to take it, put it, also justice. Yeah, so justice and dope, and then just dope, like it's only drugs. Those are kind of the two double entendres. But the book is about um, it's my memoirs, like growing up, like in the marijuana, you know,
Yeah.
legalization movement.
Mhm.
Also, like growing up with Holocaust survivors and kind of talking about the implications of that, epigenetic trauma. So, like the science of, um, addiction, which shows now that there's trauma that's passed down, and like using like Holocaust as an example, my own stories, um, and then kind of like celebrity culture, like with drugs, and kind of like what I learned for, and I followed. Um, River Phoenix's kind of story is like an interesting kind of little microcosm because, um, he died like very close to in between my dad's office and my mom's house in
Mhm.
the Viper Room. And also like a lot of his like conflicts I read about had to do with growing up in this like uh, kind of in a very extreme version of like in not a good way of the whole like let's say guru culture, but he grew up in like this cult called Children of God, which like involved kids having sex with each other, and
Hmm.
yet his parents were very like into purity and anti drug, and then kind of having to deal, but yeah, there was all this hypocrisy and like kind of that story I thought was like very interesting growing up, and I thought was interesting to tell. So it goes through kind of that, and then a social history of like just the racist origins of the drug war, kind of picking up on some like of the modern literature about that. Like this book I talked about, Chasing the Scream by Johann Harari, and uh, there's a couple other books that are kind of highlighted.
Okay.
We get into some of my own like trials and tribulations, both like using drugs, advocating for legalization, and doing trials of interest, like covering areas people don't realize about the prosecution of medical marijuana doctors and people who worked with them, for example, and like going through this like huge trial I did that like ended up where the clients got convicted, but then I got the convictions overturned because the judge had been so prejudiced against me. Like going kind of through like kind of like my literally trials and tribulations. And then, also going through my own personal dealings with like cannabis and the law, the legal system, and talking about like my custody battle with like my father's daughter, who was a friend of mine, my mom having to like defend basically like cannabis use and not having to like, how that was, and kind of then going over how it is for other people, which is not as good as my situation, and the reality of like when people are on Medicare and uh, or even just have or just people of color, they end up getting drug tested and losing their kids, and kind of going over like, here's my experience, but the rest of the world is like this. Mine was still rough, but not like that. I didn't have any of those things happen. But I was
Yeah.
very lucky, and everybody, most other people are not in that situation. So we go over like what that means. And then we kind of come out the other side to a discussion of progressive prosecutors, like my friend George Gascon here in LA, and trying to explain to people like their philosophy, which is a lot of people really don't understand, which is has to do with like what I kind of talked about early in the book, epigenetic trauma and stuff, which is the idea that like if the if people pass down trauma and the government's creating more trauma by abusing people who are accused of crime, the next generation will continue to abuse others. And this is like something I learned back at Columbia from when we read Nietzsche, you know, the genealogy of morals, like people who are beaten, they beat other people until they heal themselves. So I tried to like, that's kind of my bigger point, you know, is like, I hope that this explains, if someone reads this, they understand like, and they give a chance to like the, you know, progressive prosecutors, for example, who are trying to create less trauma so that the next generation will have some more, you know, respect for other humans, for example. So that's kind of an A through Z and what the book's about.
Oh, so do you have the book right there?
No, but I can get it.
I want you to grab your book.
Let me see where it is.
I threw you a curveball.
I got my daughter's copy.
All right, so that's cool.
It's not read and nobody, hopefully will never read.
Okay, so I want you to just pick a place and read.
Okay, pick a place.
Pick a place like you'd like to read.
Okay. All right, well, I just picked a good place. It's chapter
right.
13. I did it randomly, but this is a good one.
Chapter 13, what page? So when people get the book, they can.
Yeah, this is going to be page 165.
All right, go ahead.
And it's called Cannabis 2.0, C is for corruption. No, what do you want? 2 paragraphs?
Sure. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. While there is no doubt that huge advances have been made in the last 30 years with regard to medical and recreational access to marijuana, as well as efforts to decriminalize marijuana and dismiss past convictions, the number of arrests and prosecutions are still disturbing. Echoing the experiences of the Prohibition era, local corruption has abounded in the pot industry. Just as multiple levels of government were implicated in bribery schemes in the 1920s, especially in the enforcement and interpretation arena, e.g. cops, mayors, customs, etc., the current day has seen a proliferation of corruption in the pod sector. There are some interesting differences between the two eras and some similarities. In both eras, local officials are investigated and prosecuted all over the country for bribery, tax evasion, and money laundering in connection with bribery schemes. The difference is that modern corruption involves city officials illicitly receiving money to favor cannabis development. If not for the federal illegality of cannabis and California's overregulation of cannabis zoning, the level of corruption would not be as high as it is. That said, I don't want to minimize the current prevalence of bigger development bribery schemes in which cannabis only plays a small part. In my 4 years in cannabis lobbying, I've found that the line between politics and criminality is often much thinner than it is in the criminal courts building.
Okay. All right. Pick another section.
Okay. I'll pick something much more personal.
Yeah, that's good.
Yes. Chapter 1.
Okay.
Which is
chapter 1.
Chapter 1.
That's easy. That's easy. Chapter 1. Go for it.
Chapter 1.
Chapter 1, everybody.
7. When the birds chirp. On a December morning in 2002, I climbed into the passenger seat of my dad's BMW with bloodshot eyes and half a gram of cocaine burning a white-hot hole in my pocket. He was patiently waiting for me, parked outside my mother's house on a quiet street, as he had done so many times before. It felt like the first day of school, except that I was 25 and exhausted. Instead of dropping me off at kindergarten, my father was driving me in my first court appearance as a freshly admitted lawyer. I'd been working towards this day since I was 8. The day before, I, along with hundreds of other bright-eyed and bushy-tailed lawyers who had passed the notoriously difficult California bar exam, had gathered in the federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles. A judge whose face I don't remember swore us in. I was still dazed from my flight from Michigan, and the ceremony was about as romantic as a cattle call, with throngs of neophytes all snapping pictures and making plans for lunch. It wasn't a big deal to me, but it should have been. After years of all-night study sessions in the dim libraries of Columbia and Harvard Law, after weeks of listening to tapes in preparation for the bar exam, after a lifetime of following my dad, another criminal defense attorney, to courtrooms across the state, and watching him defend his clients like a pothead Atticus Finch, I was about to join that exclusive club. I was going to cross the bar and join real lawyers on the other side. And the man who was ushering me into this elite group was my father, whose politics had inspired me to devote my career to freeing people. here I was about to fuck it all up before I started.
Awesome.
Yeah, it wasn't my case, it was my dad's case, so I've never gone to court high on cocaine. So, but it starts out like a cliffhanger, which is kind of, how I learned to write when I was at Columbia from one of my favorite memoirists, who was my writing teacher. So yeah.
Well, that's great. So what is, like, you mentioned something to me about your jam when we first started. What is your jam?
What do I like to do? I mean, professionally?
Yeah, professional. Like, what is it that you, because you're
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
a lot of things. So
well, I mean, what I do, like my day job, which is like how I make money, and what I do is being a criminal defense attorney. For some years, from like 2017 through like 2021, we also did, like, I did cannabis licensing, which meant, helping people get licenses for cannabis related ventures. And I still do it for my clients that I've had for quite a while, but I stopped doing it for new clients, because of kind of some of the issues that I just read about, the corruption issues, and the overregulation, which is like crippled the industry. And the truth is, like, I kind of only did that work because at the time it overlapped with my criminal defense work in California, as is the case in New York, New Jersey. We have a social equity program. So here, there were different types of advantages for people who are already in the marijuana business. They could then use that to get licensed. So that was really fun. And I was also using some of my same skills I use, like in criminal defense, which is gathering evidence, actually, to show people have an affirmative defense, or things I do. But as the industry died, I also then got involved in a civil rights case that involved the provision of water and access to water trucks. And from that, I ended up in Siskiyou County, which is very high up in NorCal, on the border of Oregon. And that case ended up reviving my criminal defense practice at the same time as the industry was imploding, the marijuana industry. So I'm back to doing what was pretty much my bread and butter, which is criminal defense. And I do like everything from money laundering to murder cases. And the only thing I don't do is I don't represent informants. And I don't generally do, like, I don't once in a while I do some, I've done sex cases on occasion that are particular things, like, an 80-year-old person with no record who has dementia, like touching someone's breasts, or, that's an example of a case I've handled. But generally, and I've also I tried a murder case, which ended up going very well, thank goodness, this year. And I had that case for 7 years and involved a self-defense. So that's really what I enjoy in terms of criminal defense, in terms of my law practice. The writing is definitely not a job quite thing. I wish I have ideas as to how to make money from it, but it's not like I haven't, I don't know if they made back my advance yet, Penguin yet, but I'm happy I did it. And I'd like to get it adapted into some kind of, dramatic performance and work on my next book. And other than that, I have, 2 kids, and I have many animals, and my hobby is really I have a place up in NorCal, next to like where I do a lot of business in Siskiyou County, which is the place where I do that water rights case. And I do have my practices up there. So like, I enjoy, I have trout there, and then I have a bunch of dogs that I bring back and forth, and a bunch of cats, and I have koi, and I have 2 kids. So those are
that's a big deal. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
I like it. Yeah. So let me ask you this. What do you want people to know about you? Like, they probably would be surprised to hear, like the real you, you.
Yeah. That I don't like, that I don't like to, that I like I don't know, I probably, that like, I'm doing, like, basically my life is like what I ideally would like to do. Even if I didn't have to work, I would still not, I would only go, like, my preference would be just to go up and down California to my place in Mount Shasta with my trout. And I would be reading all day and writing.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of things that what people don't know about me that I'd like them to know, I think it's important for people to know, is that I was like, in order for me to accomplish like what I did and do what I do, and this I think they miss because I'm very casual, I work like a 12-hour day, which is not bad really. I work out of my house, but I mean, I work, and I've been working like that since I was like 8 years old. Not a 12-hour day, but like since I was 8 years old, I've been like very devoted to my studies. Like, when I was a kid, I would study several hours a night, but like by the time I was in high school, I was like, studying till midnight and every weekend. And just, I think like I think it's important for me, for people to know that like the hard work is like kind of like the key to everything. And I think that because I have like I have a casual demeanor and like my vibe is casual, people don't realize that. And I think it's important for people to know, just for their own selves, like that things, that most of it's like I've had all these awesome outcomes in trials, and I think I've been able to manifest a lot of things, but I think it comes from just like working hard and trying everything as a lawyer that's ethical. And also being not afraid to like be embarrassed and have authority figures be mad at you at the same time as doing your best job. And I think that's kind of like the key to being a good lawyer. And I think that, a lot of people have a hard time with that, like doing both. And I think I can do both, which is that I can like handle, being the subject of like scorn, ridicule in order to advance my client's interests, which ultimately it does. And I think a lot of attorneys are either like, they're kind of one or the other. So I think that's something that I would like people.
Talk about that a little bit. That little, like,
Well, there's a lot of.
How did you learn? How did you learn that? Basically,
because of both of my parents are like
parents. Yeah,
they're like amazing. I'm very lucky. They're both great lawyers. My mom is great in the courtroom and great at paperwork, and gets in trouble, but is always arguing with like judges all the time and just having to do it. And it's even worse for family law because it's like it's your client's like character like determines the outcome, and that's like a horrible position to be in for a person, for any lawyer. But so she just does, sharing that with me. And my dad is also like very aggressive. And both of them, and also it's like they both, like my dad embarrassed me a lot as a child, which I think is a very good thing, because like although it turned out he was like, people thought he was cool and I wasn't, but I was embarrassed. And I think like a lot of people, they can either they might be, let's say, great writers, but like let's say they get in a courtroom, they want to appease the judge at all costs, which is not like how you create the right appellate record. Of course you have to be polite, but you also have to be like willing to push back. And so they either have that, they're like, my mom calls them paper tigers.
Okay.
Who can't be like, you don't know how to litigate a case. And then there's people who are like, just like in court, just like going off and like, they don't write anything. They don't prepare their motions well. They're happy to argue and like, kind of like, pontificate and do their thing in front of the judge, but they don't have the other part of it.
Right.
So I think that's, something. I think those are, and I'm lucky and fortunate enough that I've been able to, like through, I think mostly being able to observe my parents, be able to do both.
So that's excellent. So what about your next book? What is it going to be?
Okay, so my next book, and I need to, in order to do this, I have to sell the rights to my first book to make enough money to take a break from practicing for a minute, so that's kind of necessary. So my next book that I already started working, it's called Water and Power. And it's another double entendre, which it's like it's like one of my fun, what do you call it? Vehicles, historical vehicles. And it's about, it's gonna be the history of water politics. Okay, so just like my other book goes, like I try to do like a mini A through Z, almost like in the band. My inspiration for how I do the style of my book is that book from the 80s and the band played on by Randy Stills about the AIDS epidemic, where he goes from like patient zero, to like the airplane pilot, to like what was going on in the research facilities. So I like that dynamic of going from like different atmospheres. So Water and Power is going to go from everything from the history of water politics, from the time that like, the Europeans came to the United States and what was going on with the Native Americans, the tribes, the treaties, which actually there was a big Supreme Court case about that recently. And then on the other part of the world, the story of like the Hmong, which are the people I represented up in Northern California, and then from like Vietnam through like them ending up in being like the epicenter of the international water debate over water, economic justice and marijuana and stuff. And then I'm going to go through like Flint, Michigan, and their, water situation, Mississippi, and then internationally, and like, what can we do in the future?
Mhm.
What can we do like desalinization, kind of looking at all the different things, both from science and like on a political level. And at the, and then figuring out like how to distribute water and power in a way that's gonna sustain, humanity and animals and be fair economically. So that's, and then also getting into all this interesting stuff I learned about like the Hmong people and their
Yeah.
politics. And
Yeah.
it's really fascinating because I like, I've spent quite a bit of time in Shasta Vista, which is where there's a very high concentration of Hmong people. That's where it's in Siskiyou County. So I've like gotten a chance, like I've had to negotiate, for me to be able to even be the lawyer on the case that I did, I had to do quite a bit of politicking with like their traditional political structure,
Mhm.
which involves like 18 families and 18 leaders in each community. So I thought it'd be fun to kind of combine these elements, the way that I combine like drug use and history and
Mhm.
race
Mhm.
in my other book.
Yeah,
So,
no, it sounds great. And maybe your book should go like to the law school.
well,
No.
yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, I mean, that's so ideally I would have a person employed to do the following. Like if I could every day send the book out to like a different school, like, so there's thousands probably of classes on drug law history, cannabis. And I have like, I don't know how many footnotes do we have. The book has like hundreds of footnotes. So it's quite educational as well. And
Right.
if I could just have someone like send the book out every day to a different professor and try to get them to assign
Yeah.
it to like make a career of it. I just haven't found someone to do that particular thing. But that's like really what I need to do. There's, let's see, let's see how many chapters.
Just get a virtual assistant to do it.
I don't know about that. Like I like to sit with it. I mean, I could, but like, I don't know. You kind of have to, I don't know. I kind of like it to be a little more intimate than that. Let's see. I mean, I guess 15 times 20. So there's 15 chapters with about 20 footnotes a chapter. It's like 300 footnotes. So it's like, it could be, this is like, could be definitely read. And in a classroom.
Right, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, I just need to like figure that out. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, go for it. Lean
Yeah.
forward.
So
Right?
yeah.
But let me just ask you this. Talk about and then we'll wrap it up.
Sure.
And if there's anything else that you want to say, make sure that you say it. But tell me about manifesting. Like, is that like a big focus of yours?
Well, I just was brought up. I mean, it wasn't really focused. I was just brought up with, metaphysical philosophy. Like my dad, like
Okay.
just taught me that I could, create whatever I wanted. And when I was a little kid, and he taught it to me, I thought, like I said, oh, I want a basket of puppies, and I went outside and didn't see any, but now I have like 4 dogs and 13 cats and
Yeah.
koi, trout. So I was taught it from like a really early age, and then I
Yeah.
was able to like, and then because I like early on learned how to work hard, I was able to accomplish what I wanted to.
Right. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I mean, and so like I, still, um, obviously like believe in it, but it's not like it's like something that I consciously have to think about because I was
Right. It's
brought up.
just, yeah,
Yeah.
automatic.
Yes.
Do you, and so, do you, I would imagine do you have like certain things that you want to make sure that you teach your kids?
Well, yeah. I mean, being kind and hardworking are like the major.
Yeah.
They're pretty much. Those are the two things. Um, I would like to like make them feel, I don't know, better just about like death coming from life. Um,
Mhm.
that I'm not quite, I haven't like really like, but they're not really too preoccupied with death. My dad was a lot more than, so when I was little, my dad was always like studying death. And I was always like worrying about it a little bit because I don't know, because I was like with him, I was like his number one confidant. Um, so I would like them also to have some peace about that, but they seem to be like cool. They have a lot more peace about, death coming from life than I do. So that seems to be something that I don't have to like really work on. But the hardworking part and the kind part,
Yeah.
you know. But I do want them also though, like being like, I don't know. The last part is the struggle, the life and death part, but they seem to not be
Yeah.
worried about it. But they're young.
Yeah.
So.
Very young. The reason I asked you the question is because of your parents. I was just thinking that when I was talking to you today that maybe you have like a short list or maybe a long list of things that your parents taught you, and you want to make sure that you teach those same things to your kids. I know about the kind part, but you know what I mean. Just
No, they know there's nothing. They didn't teach me any, like there's nothing really that they like taught me else. Honestly, they were just like that's what they did.
yeah, sound like they're good parents and they exposed you to a lot of great
Yeah,
experience.
and my mom is, they're still good. They still like my mom I talk to like many times a day, and my dad like once or twice. But
Yeah. All right.
yeah.
Good. So, anything else you want to tell everybody about yourself?
No, but I would hope everybody does get my book.
Yeah.
It was fun to read. It makes, whenever you write something, you're always like, every time you read again, you're like nervous there's going to be like a mistake or something, even though I read it.
Right.
And that was like refreshing. I think that's pretty much it. I think they'll find out quite a bit and see how I do my thing. So, that's it.
Hold your book up. We didn't hold your book up so we could see it.
And you can, it's a Penguin. It's like
Awesome.
North Atlantic with like Penguin Random House is the distributor, and
Yeah.
and the quotes on the back are actually from LA's District Attorney George Gascon, who's a friend of mine, who's an awesome guy.
Oh, read that quote. Read that quote.
Sure. Just Dope has the potential to become one of those once in a generation books, shaking up popular beliefs about the role of drugs in American culture and tipping the scales toward a more humane and thoughtful approach in the future.
Nice.
Yeah. So
Wonderful. Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you for spending some time with me today.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, all right. So long, everybody. Chris Mullins and Lawyers Tell All. See you soon. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Lawyers Tell All, where Chris Mullins takes you on a journey with lawyers in the trenches who show you the realities of what it takes to succeed in this chaotic, crowded, ever-changing profession. Remember to visit our website at www.lawyerstellall.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on Lawyers Tell All.